morning and welcome to WNHH Radio's Dateline New Haven. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make the Elm City tick. Our guests today are in the trenches, working out what should be a big story in the headlines, but doesn't always make it. The state of low-wage work, and whether people can make a living with respect by working. Say good morning to James Bandari Alexander. He's a staff attorney at New Haven Legal Assistance Association, Legal Aid, where he's spearheading a new effort to beef up their fight for workers' rights. Joining him is Haiti Montez,
yes,
who's going to translate for us today from Legal Aid, and Maribel Herrera, who will tell us a cautionary tale of her firsthand experience navigating the world of low-wage work. We want to thank Yale New Haven Hospital for providing support for today's program. Welcome, everyone, and thanks for coming on Dateline New Haven.
Thanks for having us, Paul.
Okay, love that, a vote of confidence. So, James, before we get into Maribel's story, tell me about this. There's always been a one-person unit at Legal Aid that works for workers' rights, but it's been expanded, or you're in the process of expanding it. What is this campaign? What's going on, and why are we talking about it now?
Well, as you know, New Haven Legal Assistance has been around for 50 years, providing free civil legal representation.
That's right. A lot of famous people have gone through that. Clarence Thomas, the Supreme Court Justice, used to work at Legal Aid.
He did as a student. He was in our office for a year, actually.
I'm going to ask you to get closer to the mic.
Yeah. Hillary Clinton had some connection to our office, and we have a lot of students there now who I'm sure are going to make history in the future, doing the right thing, we hope. So for 50 years, we've been doing this. We think that there's never been more than one attorney working on labor and employment issues, and we're thinking about how we can change that. So at the end of October, we're going to have a fundraising party at Bregamos Community Theater. There is an event on Facebook called Community Fundraiser for Workers' Rights, and you can find information on our Facebook page and our website about how to donate to this campaign. We have a funder who is actually anonymous, who's...
Did he write that article in the Times about the Trump administration?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
Because anonymous, that
No. These are funders who looked around and noticed that it's very hard to get money to represent low-wage workers in workplace matters. And a lot of the major foundations don't give money for this. A lot of the foundations that provide public interest law students with the opportunity to go out and do good work after graduation will not fund workers' rights projects.
Boy, why is that? That because a lot of money might come from liberals who are kind of corporate-minded and don't want to see, they want to have more protections for corporations workers, or it's just not on the radar the same way because it's not sexy?
I don't know all of it, but clearly and obviously the fact that major law firms and major donors often have important relationships to large companies affects the kind of work that they're interested in. I wouldn't single out any particular case, but of course that must be true.
That's so interesting. And I imagine, James, that one reason you're looking to expand your effort is because of this demand. Is there a trend that more low-wage workers need legal representation than in the past?
Without knowing any statistics, I can tell you there are more low-income people in Connecticut than there have ever been. There was just an article the other day that you are a child born in Connecticut, you are more likely to be born into a poor family than a non-poor family.
Really?
Yes.
Birth rates are higher. Wow.
So you have always had a lot of income and wealth inequality in the state, and it's exacerbated when wages are stagnant and profits are up. So,
James, you handle these kind of cases. Are you able to handle all the cases that come through your door?
No, we're not. No legal services program in the country is able to handle all of the cases that come in the door or are presented to us in various ways. So we all have to make priorities to, you could say, triage the cases. I don't like using that term. I'd like to think that we look for cases in our unit at New Haven Legal Assistance. We're looking to support worker organizing we're looking to
make deeper, lasting change.
So,
I mean, I think of illegal aid in two ways. Well, many ways in New Haven. It's a great agency. One is looking to make systemic change case by case, since a lot of times you're prevented from filing class actions, correct?
We are not, because we do not take any federal money.
Oh, excellent. Okay.
So,
but the other, I also think of you as canaries in the coal mine. So when Church Street South was falling apart and people were sick and you had a public health crisis brewing, it really was legal aid that found that out and made change happen. When you talked about the lead paint crisis we have in our city and so many kids growing up exposed to dangerous lead paint, it's you guys who found it case by case and then worked on systemic action. And right now, even though you're right, I believe that it's not sexy, quote unquote, for donors. You don't read a lot about low wage work. What you do read is pretty chilling, because what we're finding out, I think, is that if you have low wage work, it's harder to work for a living, make a living working, than it used to be. And tell me if I'm right about that. Matthew Desmond had a great article in the New York Times Magazine about this a couple of weeks ago. And he talked about how we all have this idea that if someone just gets a job, they won't be poor. But in fact, a lot of people are making wages so low with non-existent or barely ample benefits that you can't afford to work sometimes, that you can't, you can't get health insurance, you can't pay for the health insurance, you can't pay for an apartment with prices going so high in cities. He talked about it's really about assets now, that poverty, what keeps you locked into long poverty is not whether or not you have a job, but whether or not you have assets. Do you own a home? Do you have savings? And that the number of Americans living on $2 or less per person a day has more than doubled since so-called welfare reform of the 1990s. Roughly 3 million children, bigger than the population of Chicago, live that way. And that's a pretty heavy trend.
Yes.
So how are you seeing that here? Now, you notice also that you've done work with immigration cases. Are they overlapped?
Well, the way in our office, we've worked a lot with on immigrant worker cases for several reasons. One is that for many immigrant workers, there is no safety net. The work is all that they have in this country, and so the workplace is exceptionally important to them. Another reason is that some of the most dynamic organizing in New Haven and in state and in the country is done in immigrant communities around workplace issues. So they're often organizing campaigns that have to do with workplace issues.
John Lugo, who's one of the original organizers of the campaign, is getting a national award this week for Center for Community Change in Washington.
Yes, and John is one of my major influences. I promised I wouldn't mention him on the air.
Yeah, why was that?
Because he doesn't, crave that kind of attention of an award. But anyway, Unidad Latina en Acción as a group, as an organization, has accomplished so much in this city to drive change in the area of how immigrant workers are treated, including collaborating with our office in 2016 on important state legislation that changed the way wage theft is dealt with by expanding the damages that are available to low-wage workers who are victims of wage theft.
And James Madari Alexander, I do want to talk about some of the changes you are seeking in laws and in systemic barriers that face. But I'd like to first talk about Maribel Herrera's experience and how that ties into what you were just saying about the challenges low-wage work. And Maribel, is Maribel an immigrant? Where are you from originally, Maribel? And Maribel is having her words translated.
Muy buenos días. Gracias por invitarme a su programa.
Good morning. Thank you for having me here.
Yo soy de México.
She is from Mexico.
How long ago? ¿Cuántos años?
Tengo 19 años.
She has been here 19 years.
Okay, and so how did you end up meeting James and why?
Llegué a conocer el señor James por medio de una compañera, Rosa.
She met James through a friend of hers named Rosa.
And why did you go to see him? What was the problem you were having? ¿Dónde trabajo? Where were you working and what was the issue?
Yo viví 15 años en Nueva York, en el Bronx.
She was Living in New York for 15 years.
Hace 4 años yo me vine para acá, para Connecticut.
And she moved here. She moved to Connecticut 4 years ago.
Buscando trabajo en una laundry, encontré una tarjeta.
Looking for work, she found a card at a laundromat.
Decía Amity Cleaning Service, se busca gente para trabajar.
And it said that Amityville Cleaning Services were looking for people to work.
Entonces yo llamé por teléfono y me contestó la señora, se llama María Cortés.
And she called and Maria Cortez answered the phone.
Yo le dije que estaba buscando trabajo y me dijo que sí, que fuera a verla y fui a verla y empecé a trabajar con ella.
So she told her that she was looking for work, and she went to see her and she started working with her.
At a laundromat.
It's cleaning services.
And where is that based? ¿Dónde?
She doesn't remember exactly where.
So what happened when you worked there?
Yo empecé a trabajar con ella, la señora se empezó a portar muy amable, muy buena persona.
So when she started working there, the lady was very friendly with her, and she was being very nice to her.
Empecé con ella, me pagaba $10 la hora.
So she was working there, getting paid $10 an hour.
$10 an hour.
Yeah. Yes.
Al principio eran 8 horas, 6 horas.
At first, it was 8 hours, 6 hours.
3 días, 2 días a la semana.
3 days or 2 days a week.
A los 3 meses, mi hija tuvo un accidente.
3 months later, her daughter got into an accident.
Yo tenía que salirme del trabajo, le decía a ella que tenía que irme porque tenía que llevar a mi hija a la emergencias porque no se sentía bien.
So she would ask her employer that she had to leave because she would have to take her daughter to the emergency room because she wasn't feeling well.
What was the accident?
Ya en la casa en temporada de la nieve se quebró el tobillo.
During the winter time at her house, her daughter broke her leg.
Okay.
Entonces yo le decía a la señora que me tenía que ir, que no podía quedarme porque tenía que llevar a mi hija al hospital. La señora se empezaba a molestar.
So when she would tell her employer that she had to leave to take her daughter to the emergency room, she would get mad.
Entonces me empezaba a decir que si seguía así, que no podía darme más días, más horas, porque ella necesitaba gente que estuviera trabajando sin tener un horario fijo de salir.
So she would tell her that she couldn't have her leaving the place of work anymore because she needed people to be working there at the times that she needed.
Como al año me subió a $10.50.
After a year, she had a raise in her salary to $10.50.
Entonces la señora ya quería que hiciera el trabajo más rápido. No teníamos una hora de entrada, una hora de salida.
And at that time, she wanted her to start working a little faster. She didn't have a time to go in and a time to come out of work.
Yo me levantaba a las 4 o 5 de la mañana para dejarles la comida a mis niños que se iban a la escuela.
So she would cook. She would have to get up at 4 in the morning to cook for her children before she will go to work, so that her children will have food to come back home to.
Tomaba el autobús como a las 6:30 para llegar a downtown y tomar otro autobús para llegar a su casa.
So she would take a bus at 6:30 to go to downtown to take another bus to get to her place.
Llegaba a su casa como a las 7:30 más o menos.
And she would get to her house around 7:30.
House or the business?
So her house was the place where they would
Oh, it was
get
in a woman's
together.
house?
Yes.
Llegaba ahí con ella y me empezaba a decir que revisara el material que teníamos que llevar para empezar a trabajar, botellas de líquidos, cosas para el trabajo.
So once she would get there, she would have her check for the supplies that they were going to be using that day and make sure that everything was filled, chemicals that they were going to use.
Que revisáramos que no nos hiciera falta nada, porque si llegábamos a donde íbamos a trabajar y nos hacía falta algo, que ella no iba a llevar lo que nos hiciera falta y nos las teníamos que arreglar como nosotros pudiéramos.
So she would tell them, to make sure that they had everything filled and ready for the day, because she wasn't gonna bring anything if something was missing. She wasn't gonna bring anything for them, and to kind of, figure it out themselves if that was to happen.
Ese tiempo ella no nos los pagaba, entonces nos íbamos para empezar nuestro trabajo en la primera casa como, digamos, a las 8:30. Ese tiempo empezaba a correr ya nuestro horario que ella nos tenía que pagar.
So she wouldn't pay them for the time that they arrived at her house to check for the supplies, get all the supplies together. That time she was not paid for. She will get paid at the time that they arrive at the location where they were going to be.
Oh, the first they
doing
went to a
cleaning.
house and then they worked somewhere else? I'm a little
Yes.
confused about that. So they would
Yeah, so
stop
they-
off at the woman's house, see if there are enough supplies for the day, and then bring those supplies
Bring those
somewhere?
supplies to the place where they were going to be cleaning.
Oh, they're going to
um,
people's houses to clean.
Yes.
Okay.
So she wouldn't get paid for that time
Mhm.
until she arrived to the location where they were going to do the cleaning.
Entonces, uno pensando al día vamos a hacer mínimo unas 9, 10 horas. Al final del día, entre las 6, 9 de la noche, salíamos con 7 horas, 9 horas, no de todos los días.
So she was saying that when they were expecting to get paid for 9 hours, they will end up getting paid for only 6 hours.
Oh, wow. So it was really under minimum wage.
Sí, después la señora ya quería que hiciera un trabajo más rápido porque tenía más casas que limpiar y quería que lo hiciéramos en una casa 3 horas, 2 personas. Quería que lo hiciéramos lo más rápido que se pudiera, sin importar si quedó bien o mal. Si quedó mal y le llamaban, le decía, es que ustedes dejaron mal, y tuve que mandar otro equipo para terminar el trabajo.
So the lady expected her, they would send 2 people to clean the houses, and she expected them to go really fast because she had other places that they had to get done. And she expected them to do it in 3 hours, even if it wasn't a good job. But at the end, if that wasn't done right, it will fall on them, and she would get mad at them for not doing.
So what was the
That's right.
last straw that got Maribel to go to James Bandari Alexander at Legal Aid?
Yo ya estaba muy estresada, muy cansada por no pasar tiempo con mis hijos, porque la señora quería que trabajara sábados, domingos. Em, entonces yo le dije, señora, yo creo que mi trabajo ya vale más. Yo quiero que usted me pague un poco más o definitivamente yo no puedo seguir trabajando con usted.
So she said that what made her come to legal assistance was she had enough. She wanted to spend more time with her children. She had to work Saturdays and Sundays. And so she went to her and said, I can't do this anymore. If I don't get a raise, I can no longer work for you.
And was it 7 days a week at that point?
Correcto.
Okay. So she was working like 63 hours a week, getting paid for 42. So she wanted
Correct,
days
that's
off. She
correct.
wanted to get paid for the hours she worked. She wanted to raise.
Yes.
So what happened when you said that?
Cuando yo hablé con ella, yo le dije, si usted me paga más, yo pueda seguir trabajando con usted. Y si no, pues lo siento mucho. Yo no puedo seguir trabajando así porque yo soy una madre separada. Yo tenía que pagar los biles, comida, renta, todo sobre de mis hijos y con pocas horas yo no puedo salir adelante. Entonces ella me dijo que no podía seguirme pagando más y que era gracias por haber trabajado con ella.
So the lady, she told the lady that she was the only one working, the provider for her house. She was separated, and she was the only one paying for the bills, the food, and she needed a raise, and that it wasn't enough. So the lady said that she wasn't able to give her a raise, and that pretty much thank you for working for me. And
So she got
Okay.
fired for asking for a raise. And for fewer hours, correct? For a raise and a day off.
yes.
And
Okay.
her coworkers, some of her coworkers also came to the office, and according to the report of one of those workers, the boss told her, I know you went to see that lawyer on State Street. I think you need to take a break from working.
All right.
So in her case, the termination was very clearly in retaliation for talking to us.
All right, and we're going to take a break to remind you that you're listening to Dateline New Haven, WNHH FM, your home for community radio, 103.5 FM, live streamed at newhavenindependent.org. We're talking about workers' rights, low-wage workers' rights. We're hearing the story of Maribel Herrera, who came from Mexico, went to work for a cleaning service in the west side of town, it sounds like, and was fired for, she says, for asking for a raise and to be paid for the hours she worked and to get a day off. She was not the only one. She went to legal aid. How did you know, Maribel, to go to legal aid? How had you heard about going to that lawyer on State Street?
Cuando yo trabajaba con la señora María, ahí conocí a Rosa, que ella entró a trabajar, que es una de las compañeras de trabajo. Ella entró a trabajar con nosotros. Entonces, cuando yo me salí, Rosa se quedó. Al poco después, ella me llamó, y me contó lo que había pasado similar a lo mío con la señora. Entonces ella me comentó que había conocido aquí al señor James. Entonces me dijo que tenía, que había hablado con él para ayudarnos con lo que nos había pasado. Entonces yo fui a conocer al señor. Por medio de eso fue que llegué a su oficina.
So she found out about legal aid through a coworker, Rosa. She had come to work with her, and after she left, Rosa stayed with the company, and she started having the same situation with her employer, and she reached out um, to her to let her know that she was having similar problems, and that she had gone to New Haven Legal Assistance, spoke to James, and that he was going to try
That lawyer
to,
on State Street. So, James, you're that lawyer on State Street. You work at Legal Aid. So first person came to you was Rosa Morales?
Yes, and Rosa is someone I've known for a long time because Rosa's been working cleaning people's houses in and around New Haven for many, many years. She's worked for different services. She worked on a case with a company called Antibella that was a similar case about unpaid wages and harassment that actually the New Haven Independent reported on several years ago. And Rosa is a natural organizer and a really fierce champion for her coworkers. So she's brought many cases over to me over the years. She's testified in front of the Board of Aldermen on domestic workers' rights. She's given interviews to the press. So it's people like Rosa, really, who build this base of workers in the area who will stand up and fight for their rights. And luckily, I know her. And
so a bunch. How many of the work? What was the name of this cleaning company?
It's Amity Cleaning Services.
And how many? And that's just domestic workers going to people's houses and clean their homes.
Yes.
And how many of them came to you for this case?
At least 5.
Wow.
And so we are preparing the case now. When Rosa lost her job, we figured, and it was explicitly because she was talking to us, we figured that we needed to file the case as soon as possible. So we're preparing it, and we'll file it in federal court soon.
And then, so what are you charging? What are you saying happened to these 5 workers? What remedies are you seeking?
It's going to be different for the different workers, but the thing that the legal claim they have all in common is a failure to pay for all the hours worked and a failure to pay an overtime premium. These sometimes they were working 60 hours a week, sometimes they were working more like 80 hours a week. They never got a penny in overtime.
Is there a federal statute about overtime?
Yes, the Fair Labor Standards Act is the federal statute that provides for overtime protections.
Sorry, the Fair Standards Act?
Fair Labor Standards Act. And there's a Connecticut analog. And what that law says is for most workers, you have to be paid an hour, time and a half for hours over 40. So that'll be the basis of the allegation. Now, Connecticut has a special law called 3151Q that protects employees' rights to freely associate and speak, even vis-a-vis their employer. So an employer cannot punish or discipline or fire a worker for exercising their free association rights, which is what she did when Rosa came to New Haven Legal Assistance. So we will also be alleging that.
Now, that's a state claim. Could that be used in a federal suit?
Yes.
How does that work?
Federal courts have supplemental jurisdiction over states' claims. So
if they're tied into do you have to have some kind of federal claim as well?
Yes, and the judge has some discretion, but as long as there's a federal claim, normally it will be able. Employers often prefer to be in federal court, actually, and I like to bring cases there, so I've never had that challenge.
So you have 5 workers, like Maribel and Rosa, who work. They're all ex-workers now because they wanted to be paid for overtime.
Correct.
And how many of them you have the second claim about organizing?
That's still unclear, but Rosa has a very good claim, and we're still investigating the other workers.
Still investigating. Okay. So how does this fit into the work you do in general? Do you get a lot of these cases? And are we talking about immigrants here? Was it 5 immigrants?
I don't know the immigration status of any of them actually, but I think that in this industry, cleaning houses, it's mostly people from other countries, from all over the world actually, who are working in this sector in New Haven.
And does that make them easier to take advantage of, or it depends more on the case?
Typically, as you know, of course, employers feel a certain sense of power vis-a-vis workers that they feel are vulnerable in general. And one of those vulnerabilities can be immigration status, lack of capacity with the English language, things like that. So we definitely we know that that's a particularly vulnerable community.
So what is your current caseload of cases like this? How many workers' rights cases do you have on your plate right now, James Bandari Alexander, at Legal Assistance Association? And how many could you have if you had more staff?
Right. Well, I always have maybe between 4 and 6 active federal workers' rights cases that could involve anywhere between, say, 10 and 20 clients. Sometimes we have really huge cases with hundreds of clients. So right now, I probably have 10 active cases. I probably have 5 or 6 cases I'm investigating, and a few old cases that are more complicated that I continue to work on from years past. If we had another person, we could literally double our capacity to take these cases, and that is something that's very exciting for us.
And we're talking about workers' rights here on Dateline New Haven, WNHH, 103.5 FM, livestream, newhaven.org. Richard Palfax, thank you for the thumbs up. Tegan Engel and Tom Ficklin, thanks for tuning into the show here on Facebook. James Bandari Alexander, in addition to filing cases, you've been involved in trying to get laws changed and in organizing people about getting some of the rules changed outside of passing laws. I want to talk about a couple because what is, we talked about the state of low-wage work, how it's harder and harder to pay the bills and make a living if you're working for a living. You've made a list for me about some of the factors in that some of the systemic changes that need to happen for that to turn around. And and you talk about arbitration agreements and class action waivers. Does that mean that companies more and more get employees to sign a document that says you will not sue us, you will take something to arbitration, the kind of process they control in-house rather than ever sue? Why is that legal?
Well, it's legal because Congress passed a law called the Fair Arbitration Act, which is a federal statute that controls this area. Originally, the law was aimed at avoiding unnecessary litigation between businesses, but it is now used routinely, and this has been blessed by the Supreme Court, to govern employer-employee disputes. And recently, the Supreme Court has even said that it's perfectly acceptable for employers to insert class action waivers also.
Meaning that I will never join a class action suit. Now, when you sue on behalf of 5 people, like in this case with Maribel, is that a class action suit or is it just 5 named plaintiffs?
It's 5 named plaintiffs.
Okay, so how widespread is this class action waiver?
Oh, it's about to blow up and actually one of these major law firms just put on a do-it-yourself class action waiver form online, so you can just fill in the blanks. It's pretty insidious, and it's part of a package of things right now that are about to really throw labor standards down a cliff. You combine the arbitration clause blessing with the class action waivers, with the reduced workforce at the Connecticut Department of Labor, with anti-immigrant political rhetoric, and you have a formula for a massive decline in labor standards, as bad as they are now, as unsuitable as the labor standards are for low-wage workers and completely unacceptable. It can get even worse, and that is part of what we want to build up and ramp up to fight against.
So how are you going to go about it with arbitration agreements and class action waivers?
Well, it isn't clear this will happen in Connecticut yet, but in several other states, campaigns are starting to introduce something called the Private Attorney General's Act. This is something that exists in California, where individuals can assume the role of the state in an action against an employer for workplace violations. And because the state has not signed an arbitration agreement or a class action waiver with the employer, it can proceed. In California, this passed 15 or 20 years ago, and it didn't originally have anything to do with class actions or arbitration agreements per se. It had to do with a legal aid organization that works with farm workers was fighting to allow their clients, the farm workers, to bring cases about routine issues of health and safety that they wouldn't otherwise be able to bring. And they formed this mechanism called the Private Attorney General's Act. This campaign is going to go off in 6 or 7 states, and we'll see how successful it is and whether it comes to Connecticut. But it is a way around arbitration agreements.
That's interesting. And then you're also fighting for higher minimum wage. Was it now 10.10 an hour in Connecticut?
Right. It's 10.10, which is less than half of what a living wage would be in
What is a living
any
wage?
part of Connecticut. Well, there's different ways that living wages are estimated. But for example, United Way and the University of Massachusetts have similar numbers for Connecticut, which is somewhere between $22 and $24 per hour, depending on which.
Does that include having benefits?
No, that does not include having benefits. It's not wages and benefits. It's just wages.
So how do you? Doesn't healthcare throw that all askew?
Of course.
So
right.
if you have, is that the wage you need if you have healthcare, or the wage you need if you don't have healthcare?
That is, I'm not sure of that. I know that there's different ways that they came up with those estimates, and they wind up at that number, but I don't remember off the top of my head if that includes healthcare. My guess is that it does not, and they're talking about non-healthcare expenses like room and board, food, transportation, clothing, things like that.
And I guess you involved at all in building support for raising the minimum wage is one of the issues in the governor's race this year. People want a $15 an hour minimum wage, which is not a living wage.
Right. No, it's not. I was, in fact, a co-chair of a legislative task force last year, which issued a report we called the Low Wage Employer Advisory Board. It was comprised of people from business, from nonprofits, from unions, to study the effect that minimum wage increases have had in other places and how it would affect.
What'd you find out about that? Because that's almost like a religious article of faith, where people say whether that.
So here's the bottom line is this: gradual increases in the minimum wage do not affect employment numbers, particularly in one way or the other. There's 80 years of social science research on this. The conservative studies will show a minor negative effect. The liberal, I'm talking in broad terms here, liberal studies will show a minor positive effect on employment. But somebody did a study 2 years ago where they said, okay, forget all of this. We're going to look at all the studies. We're going to do a meta study of all the studies. And they made this graph, and they point out all these studies on either side. What is the effect of employment? And the answer is there is no measurable effect on employment. And the reason is because states always do gradual increases, so businesses have time to adjust. Demand is increased when wages are increased.
Why is that? Because people do a better job?
Because people who are making minimum wage spend all their money locally, so their demand increases. And so there's 80 years. It's actually the most studied topic in macroeconomics is raising the minimum wage. So we know that it wouldn't have much of effect in a negative way. My concern now is we need people to get behind a higher minimum wage if we care about these people who are working for less than minimum wage. That's the first thing. But we have to think beyond that too, because it isn't a living wage, and there are a lot of other factors that go into our lives that are important besides just wages. And it could be true that just raising the minimum wage is not going to get us where we need to go.
Okay, we also talk about paid family leave. That's another issue in the governor's race. Ned Lamont supports it. He's a Democrat running for governor. And Bob Stefanowski, his opponent, Republican opponent, says he's against it. He thinks that people should just have lower taxes so they have more money to put away to save for emergencies. And employers should have the right to match employees' savings in those accounts if they choose. Well, why is he wrong?
Well, I'm not so sure it's a matter of right and wrong in the political positions of these candidates, but I will say that the paid family medical leave bill that we have had on the table in Connecticut, has had Republican and Democratic support. It's been changed to a large extent to meet a lot of wishes of the business community, but it still hasn't passed. The main thing to know about paid family medical leave is that it's a completely employee-funded system that is optional. So we're talking about a system that the employers don't pay a dime into, only employees pay into, and it functions as insurance if somebody is themselves sick or needs to take care of a sick family member. And when I've been at these hearings when it's debated, I always come out thinking, well, there's no way anybody can really disagree with this at this point, but I've been wrong.
All right. Now, what is monopsony? That's another issue you said is conjecture.
Yeah, so monopsony, this is like kind of a hot legal topic. So monopsony is an economist term, but it means when one or two employers have such a large share of the labor market, in other words, they hire such a large percentage of people in the labor market, that they're able to suppress wages because they're the only game in town. Essentially, it's a way of, prevents competition between workers for higher wages.
And that's the opposite of what happened when Yale got its Local 34 union formed that helped raise wages because they're such a major employer and their wages went up.
Right. And the way this plays out in low-wage workers, like, it sounds like kind of a fancy concept, but it's actually not. So, like, I have a client right now whose case I'm investigating. Last year, she was a manager at one McDonald's, or actually she was just a regular employee at a McDonald's. She wanted to be a manager at a different franchisees at McDonald's. She went, and the person at the new McDonald's said, I want to hire you as a manager, but I can't because McDonald's does not allow us to compete with other franchisees. It's called a no poaching agreement. And so she was literally doing what every
free market economist
thinks she should do, which is go get a higher wage. And McDonald's, the company, the national company, prevented it. Now, attorney generals got interested in this issue.
Now, hasn't McDonald's changed course on this?
Now they've changed course because all the attorney general's offices mostly in the Midwest and on the coast, they started investigating this as an antitrust violation, and because it prevents competition.
So did your client now get to be the manager at that McDonald's?
Well, no. Well, her story continues. So this was last year, so that's over with. Then she went and was working in home health care. And in home health care, she was obviously taking care of somebody in their home, and she wanted to go work for another company. Well, it turns out that the company she had been working for had made her sign a non-compete clause. So this is the same worker. She signed a non-compete clause. The clause itself may be illegal on its face, but what workers like her are told is, no, you can't do home health care anymore in this area. And people believe it because what do they know? It's a legal document, right? So she was then prevented from working again, and it turned out that same agency was paying her overtime. So we're investigating that case. But
have you what's the status of her case with McDonald's? She never got to be the manager.
She never got to be the
manager. Is that lawsuit live?
There's no lawsuit there. I mean, what's now happened is because of attorney general pressure, a lot of the major fast food chains have gotten rid of the no poach agreements, including McDonald's, Arby's, a whole bunch of them. And so, but it doesn't mean that there is actually a class action for people like her in Illinois that she may technically be a part of. People who were not hired as managers by McDonald's because of this no poach.
Oh, interesting. And then you also talked about wage theft. What and that's the case here when you say that because you have immigrant workers or workers who otherwise might not be able to make an effective fuss, people don't pay you for all the hours you work.
Right. I mean, so wage theft is an umbrella term.
And that you work with the Department of Labor, State Department later to investigate those cases, right? And
I bring the cases in federal court, actually. Generally, I do refer a lot of cases to the Department of Labor, but in that process, they don't need a lawyer. So in appropriate cases, we refer them out. But normally, I bring the cases in federal court, and we've in those cases recovered, many hundreds of thousands of dollars for people in New Haven in the last few years.
And then you mentioned worker-owned co-ops as part of a solution. How much is that happening? And we're talking about that since the 60s, before.
Yeah.
Are there many of them? Are you involved in making that happen? Is that something your unit wants to do at Legal Aid?
Well, we know there. I can't remember off the top of my head. There actually is a large employee-owned business. It's not a co-op here in New Haven that makes
racing,
marine manufacturing, some kind of boat manufacturing or something.
Yeah.
I mean,
boat racing. Yeah.
But as far as co-ops, there aren't a lot. But there is a surging interest in this concept here in New Haven and across the country. In fact, Professor Annika Singh Lamar from Yale Law School got legislation, not herself, but on behalf of a group, got legislation passed in the state legislature to make it easier, I believe. I don't know the details of it. It's one of the things I'm not.
There was a wave of these in the 80s, ESOPs, employee stock ownership, which sometimes were a ruse that I remember Sam Zell, when he bought the Tribune Company, called it a worker co-op, everyone signed the dot, but they really just got paid less than before.
I mean, that's useless. And to me, at the end of the day, the thing about a worker-owned co-op is that it puts the enterprise in the control of the people who actually work there and produce the value there. It's one possible way out of particularly bad situations. And something I want to measure at our October 27th fundraiser when I'm talking to people in the crowd is how many people would go ahead and make sure that they bought and went to like a restaurant or a cleaning service or a cafe that was worker owned, because I think there in New Haven, there are a lot of people who would pay a premium for that gladly. And by premium, I mean like an extra quarter for a cup of coffee to make sure people
definitely
there have
I would without even thinking about it.
So we want to go and present that too as part of part of an agenda to transform the situation.
Can that realistically be done on a large scale? Do people want to be the owners of their businesses?
Well, the most realistic approach I've seen to this is happening in New York, and is pushed by a group called Make the Road New York, especially, where they're identifying businesses, family businesses, where the family is having a hard time passing it to their children, and they don't want to sell it. And there's a lot of them in New York. And they're, instead of starting a whole new business, the idea is sell it to the workers with the administrative and legal help and so forth of this organization. So that could be a promising approach because it's a lot less difficult, and there's a lot of businesses out there in that situation.
Mm-hmm. And finally, we talk about the Janus decision, that Supreme Court decision with government workers, AFSCME specifically, saying that if you don't want to be part of a union, you don't have to pay dues, even if that union is representing you and getting you pay increases. Is that going to move over to the private sector?
Yeah, well, this is a $1 million question. So when people approach questions about what the Supreme Court will or won't do, there's different approaches you can have to it. One is to look at the case in Janus and say, well, gee, I don't see any language here at all that would apply to the private sector. The whole theory of the case has to do with it being in the public sector. How could it possibly migrate over? Another way to look at it is to look at who is on the Supreme Court and say, I can predict what that person will do with the same kind of logic. And they don't have to necessarily directly say this is because of Janus. So I think legally speaking, Janus should not have any effect on the logic of any private sector union case. But the other part of my brain that is realistic, I guess, looks at it and says, well, it depends who's on the court.
Well, there's no question also that the Koch brothers and others who push state laws through a group called ALEC see this specifically as a way to open that door and continue not only to weaken the power unions, but to go into the private sector as well as public.
Well, absolutely. And the thing to understand is that this is it's a legal battle, it's a political battle, it's an economic battle, and it's been fought with an amazing amount of patience and persistence by the Koch brothers, literally by those people. For decades now. They have a very coherent agenda. They're well funded. They're patient. They're playing the long game. So this is something I said, when Janus was just decided, is the most exciting responses to it are going to be long-term responses, because immediate responses are going to be patchwork and triaging.
Meanwhile, Richard Palafox writes in Spanish, but thanks to Harry Jose, we have the Google Translate, saying, these people are our defenders of our rights. God bless you always, and thank you for your support. Richard, thanks for writing in, and that's you folks. And you're listening to James Bandar Alexander, Maribel Herrera, translated by Hedy Montez, here on Dateline New Haven, 103.5, live stream New Haven Independent. We're about to say goodbye, but I want to ask Maribel, where are you working now, and how's life going?
Pues ahora estoy trabajando en un McDonald's y pues ya digamos que más tranquila, tengo tiempo para mis hijos, diferente.
So now she is working at McDonald's, and she is much better now and more relaxed. She has more time with her children.
And cuántos hijos?
Tengo 3.
You have three boys.
Mi hija tiene 18 años, mi hijo tiene 15 y el más chico tiene 13.
Okay.
So she has a 16-year-old daughter.
Oh, okay. So that must take some work.
2 boys.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you live in Fairhaven and work in Fairhaven?
No, trabajo en Milford.
Oh, Milford. Okay. Do you live in New Haven?
Vivo en West Haven.
West Haven. Okay. So now, do you make enough money at McDonald's to pay, like, how much do you make an hour, and how much does that pay for all your bills?
Ahorita en el McDonald's me están pagando la hora de a 10.35.
She gets paid $10.35 an hour.
And cuántos años semana?
How many hours?
Hago 35, 40 horas.
40. Okay, so you have
40.
time to be at home. And does this pay the rent? Does this pay for food?
Pues sí. Digamos
Okay.
que sí.
Yes.
So now you're in Milford. I heard that now you might want to think of applying to be a manager for McDonald's in West Haven now that the law changed.
He said, hopefully, in the future.
We wish you the
would.
best of luck. And thank you so much for coming to tell us your story today.
Gracias.
And I hope that best of luck in the court system.
Gracias a ustedes por invitarme, darme la oportunidad de
Hetty,
platicar un poco de mi historia.
Thank you for having me and sharing the story.
and thank you, Hetty, for translating. James Mandari Alexander, tell us again about what's happening on October 27th.
October 27th, there's a party at Bergamo's Theater to raise money for this work, and it's
Workers' rights.
for workers' rights at New Haven Legal Assistance. And every dollar you donate will be matched, and any amount gets you in the door. But there's a suggested contribution of $25, and you can look for more information on the New Haven Legal Assistance website or on Facebook. At the
New
Facebook
Haven
event.
Legal Assistance. Just Google it, check it out. Doing the cause, doing a great cause, and I wish you all the success with it.
Thank you,
Thanks
Paul.
for coming on.
Thanks for having
And
me.
thanks everyone for listening to Dateline New Haven. Thanks to Yale New Haven Hospital for providing support for today's program. James Mandari Alexander, Maribel Herrera, and Hetty Montez. Thank you for making this a great show. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. Now we know what it's like to be free. We just got to remember to book our flight. Fly free with us all day and all night long here at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.